Many of you already mentioned that there is a presumption then that the accused should remain at liberty before the trial, but there are some exceptions. And in some cases, people can go to jail in a pre-trial detention. But what's interesting to us is that many countries, but in my case, the French system also features rehabilitative measures at a pre-trial stage involving supervision before any finding of guilt. The main purpose of those measures is to impose a range of obligation and or prohibitions to the defendant until their court appearance. The content of those measures varies depending on the nature of the obligation that are imposed, and it can go from a simple police control, as we said earlier, to a submission to a medical treatment, or it can be a prohibition to meet some people. It could be the victim, could be an accomplice, etc., etc. And the person who is subject to them may at any time request modifications or release. And in case of non-compliance, the judge may be seized and order a detention for violating the rules. But if everything goes smoothly, probation officers who are in charge of those follow-ups that can go up to 6 months write a report to the ruling judge, who is then given lots of information about the social situation of the defendant and can then choose the most appropriate punishment. This trend has actually been institutionalized with a 2019 reform that aims at multiplying the use of what we call personality inquiries with no supervision at all. That pretrial measure aims at checking the material situation, the family situation, and the global social situation of the accused, and provide the ruling judge with several informations and the answer to that specific question: what alternative measure will best promote the social rehabilitation of the defendant. The same 2019 reform has also defined a new sentences scale, and from now on in France, 1 month imprisonment sentences cannot be ruled anymore, as they're considered like useless because it's too short to try to do something with the convicts, try to build up a project. Any imprisonment sentence up to 6 months must be executed out of jail and therefore be immediately converted into home detention or day parole, for instance. And any imprisonment sentence between 6 and 12 months, this same principle remains, and the prison sentence should be adjusted at the only condition that the convicted person situation allows it. The French ruling judge has also various alternative sanctions he or she can use, as fines, suspended sentences with no supervision, suspended sentences with probation, community service, daily fine, repair penalty, or an obligation to follow a citizenship program, for instance. And among all of these, the most common alternative sanction is the suspended sentence with probation. It requires regular meetings with a probation officer that will ensure that all the obligations and or prohibitions are fully respected by the convicted person. And aside from that check-in side, this measure mostly aims at prioritizing the person's rehabilitation, social inclusion, and reintegration. Probation services report regularly to the sentence execution judge that can act on any incident and can revoke the suspended sentences, so send people back to jail. On the other hand, that same executive judge has to deal with sentences adjustments and early releases from prison. The norm in French law is that every sentence up to 12 months must be adjusted. If the ruling judge or the court didn't adjust it at the trial, then the prosecutor of the Republic transmits that file to the executive judge, who needs to summon the convict and interview him or her before finding the best alternative way to execute that jail time out of prison. It can be executed with electronic surveillance devices or day parole, or converted into daily fines or community sentences, for example. When the convict actually started their sentence in jail, there's a process that allows the judge to grant early release for people who are left with 2 years of imprisonment. So if you're free, I mean, that is 12 months, but when you set a foot in prison, it goes up to 2 years. And the penal procedure sets the conditions that need to be gathered, such as the making of reparations to the victim, working or following some occasional activity or some educational program, entering a treatment facility, and also behaving appropriately inside the prison. And if the person does have an outside project, or like we could say a rehabilitation project, and has shown some significant efforts during detention, he or she could be granted early release in the form or of day release. It's a measure that allows people to go out of prison during the day according to a schedule fixed by the judge. And during their time out of prison, the people could be subject to the same obligations and or prohibition that can apply in case of a suspending sentence or the pre-trial measure. It's also the same. Placement in society, the convict doesn't sleep in prison and is usually hosted by a social structure which provides social support and sometimes professional or therapeutic accompaniment. There's also the electronic surveillance or the ankle monitoring. The convict can live at home wearing an ankle monitor and is prohibited to leave the house except at times fixed by the judge. Usually you can leave your house to go to work or look for work if you're actually at a job. There's also the conditional release. It's a measure that allows convicts to be released before the end of the sentence under certain conditions and can only be granted after the end of a safety term. And I have to add that the 2019 reform that I told you about has also enforced the possibility to convert any sentence reminder up to 6 months into community service or daily fine. And also a law of August 2014 that has also established a new process to promote accompanied releases. It imposes, in case of an imprisonment equal to 5 years or less, a review of the possibilities of granting sentence adjustments after the execution of 2/3 of the term of imprisonment. In this case, a rehabilitation project is not required, but we need the consent of the convicts. And actually, some convicts don't want to go through that process and prefer the classic adjustment process. Either way, the executive judge always has the possibility to revoke any sentence adjustments in case of incidents, which is often seen as a failure since those out-of-the-world measures aim at rehabilitating and avoiding new crimes and coming back to recidivism. Thank you.